Welcome to TruPowur, home of the most powerful marketing tools, training, and technology on planet Earth. Get ready to earn, enjoy, and experience more than you ever dreamed was possible. If you're tired of just getting by and ready to really thrive, then buckle in and listen up. Here's your host, Matt Fox.
Hello and welcome to today's TruPowur team call meeting. It is November 13th, 2021. Today we have a guest speaker, Eric Swiller and Bill Mole from one of our partners at SFE to talk about capacity cost. Eric is actually going to be the presenter today, so I'll pass the reins over to you. Take it away.
I've got my boss on as well, Bill, who is much better of a riffer in this situation than I am. But yeah, we wanted to go over our current Illinois promotion that runs until the end of this month, as well as maybe it's just some market general stuff, as you mentioned, capacity costs, when a true fixed price is actually a true fixed price versus some of these sort of bait and switch shell games that I know you guys see out there from other competition of ours, you know, that your customers come back and probably read you the riot act occasionally. But yeah, just sort of a mixed bag of stuff. But yeah, did the flyer for the holiday rush for the cash promotion that's Illinois specific. I don't know if that's been submitted or disseminated out to the agents or not, but we can certainly provide it again if you need it. But essentially, we're basically paying you an additional bonus over and above your mill rate for any Illinois business that you bring us, either on the electricity side or the gas side. And it probably makes more sense to send this out and have it in the hands of the agents rather than try to run through each line.
Okay, but Eric, let me jump in here. We will not force you to sit through a deck today. We're just going to speak a little bit about a couple of different topics. My name is Bill Mole. I've been with SFE about 5 years. I sit in New Jersey and run our commercial U.S. business from this office. We're headquartered in Toronto or Mississauga and operate as Summit Energy up there in 3 Canadian provinces. And we're in 9 states here in the U.S. Gas in California, power in Texas, and both commodities from Illinois clear back to Massachusetts, covering PJM. So, with Illinois, recently the pandemic-related restrictions have been lifted. Restrictions on door-to-door marketing, restrictions on telemarketing, and in this time, we spent the time entering the Ameren market. We've been in ComEd for some time and all the gas utilities out there in Chicagoland as well. So for us, it's really a full launch. And to celebrate that, we're really trying to drive some Illinois business along with our, with some rework pricing. We are doing an incentive that pays cash that will be paid out middle of December. So it runs through the end of this month, and it's, 250 megawatt hours of annual volume gets a $250 bonus, all the way on up to 5,000 megawatt hours is, I believe, $3,500 cash payment. And if you hit that mark, it starts over again. And we're doing the same on the gas side. So I'll leave that to Leah to distribute that piece of collateral so you can see what those tiers are. We're tracking it internally, to categorize each salesperson's contributions toward those goals. So, these incentives, can motivate folks around the holidays, and we just thought it was a great idea to incentivize our best partners, and we'd like to line your pockets a little bit to show you how much we appreciate it. We look at PJM from Illinois clear back to New Jersey, and the topic of capacity and the uncertainty surrounding it, the auctions or the lack of auctions over the past couple of years have, different companies take different approaches to how do we value capacity in the price buildup without really knowing, as we have in the past, costs out into the future, at least. The RPM, the reliability pricing model that afforded us those auctions, gave us visibility 3 years into the future. So while PJM is endeavoring to catch up and schedule those auctions, what we saw last time around was a clearing far below what was anticipated, what the previous auction showed us a couple of years ago, and what the 22-23 capacity year cleared at was roughly, call it $140 a megawatt day. So how do suppliers factor that uncertainty into the cost buildup? Some will simply use today's value and slug that value in for capacity, that same number into the future, understanding that if auctions clear higher, the difference will be passed through. Other suppliers, ourselves included, will build in a reasonable year-over-year increase in capacity and not anticipate a pass-through and not execute a pass-through, knowing we've got our bases covered. So how does that shake out in the price? Well, that can often generate wildly diverging prices. You might see a supplier who just says, we're going to keep this low and we're going to pass it through. Our initial offers are going to look great. And if it happens down the line, so be it. Everyone knows that this is part of the business. When you take the approach that we take, which is more conservative, which is to say, we're going to make sure that we don't have to pass anything through. The initial quote may be, on the higher end relative to those who are taking a different approach. But you've got some certainty into the future that there won't be the thing that, that nobody likes. Customers don't like it. Certainly our sales partners don't like it. And that is, a pass-through. And we're only talking about capacity, but this pass-through topic, comes up on various components of the cost buildup. Our philosophy at SFE is that's not good for us. It's not good for you, and it's not good for your customer. Price certainty is what I think fixed price buyers are looking for. So those that understand the dynamics of cap and trans and the variable nature of those two major components. I mean, energy is hedgeable. There's a market for that. And when you make your hedge today, you know that price component will be stable for the life of your term. But the other components are estimated and based on past results and not necessarily beholden to what could happen in the future. This is why we see change in law language, material change language. And while it's not necessarily a bad thing, how is that language wielded or applied in practice going forward? I mean, the extreme case we saw most recently was a company called Talon out of Pennsylvania, which was the old PP&L generation assets as well as their retail business. They've recently, after 3 or 4 years, decided we don't want to be in retail anymore. Their prices were great. They owned the generation, and contracts signed 3 years ago, those prices look very attractive. However, even if they hadn't announced they were getting out of retail, they were still sending out letters saying, hey, this auction just happened. It affects your price into the future. And oh, by the way, for some customers, retroactively, you owe us a fee because actual capacity costs diverged from what was in the buildup initially. So you take that into account and you say, well, what happens in practice? So all kinds of suppliers have all kinds of an approach. In our case, in the 5 years I've been here, we had one pass through. It was Massachusetts. It was related to the cost of SRECs. There are aggressive renewable goals in Massachusetts, and they require solar to be a major component of your RPS, your renewable portfolio standard. And that solar component can be very expensive. So, we did pass through some costs on some customers. We did our best to limit that. And in general, it's really not a place that we want to be. We're not reviewing cap tags if they are to fluctuate from year to year over the course of a term. we're not making changes based on that. So, if you go from baking pizza to smelting copper, clearly there has been a material change in the way you're using your energy. And that would be something like that would be apparent when we get our settlement statement from the ISO every month. If the ISO had to provide a significant amount of capacity or energy at the market rate, that would be evident and that would be the only red light that would say to us, hey, wow, what happened here? Because we would see it on the statement. So it is for us not productive to have a protocol to be constantly reviewing any deviation year over year or month over month for customers that are operating in their normal course of business. And even in the abnormal course of, say, the COVID limitations or the reduction in consumption, reduction in peaking, that was something that, stuff happens in this business. We took the risk and we absorbed the result of diminished volumes or, lower peaking. And, fortunate, most of that has bounced back now from what we see. Unfortunately, there were some businesses who didn't survive. And, that's also not good, but it's not something that we seek to be made whole on from a bankrupt or a defunct customer or somebody who had a hotel that just had no bookings because everyone was locked in their house for a year and a half. So, that's something that we all experienced together as brokers, as customers, as suppliers. It was I think the phrase is the black swan. It's something that no one's ever seen before. But we weathered the storm, and some suppliers that took a different approach to mitigation of risk maybe didn't fare quite as well. The episode in Texas last February was also something unforeseen and somewhat unavoidable. And we got a little black eye. Others, who had big index books of business or had unhedged open positions related to fixed price contracts. I mean, that wasn't a storm that could be weathered. So we did see some suppliers go out. For us, for SFE, it validates our approach to the business. That if you're constantly slicing it so thin and you're so aggressive on the risk component in order to deliver that lowest price in town, it's not always the prudent thing in fulfilling your contract. So where will capacity go in the future? Well, it's hard to speculate. What we know is this: in the push to eliminate fossil fuels, we've seen coal go away. We've seen or be dramatically curtailed as a component of the fuel mix. Nuclear power is not gaining in share as some think it should be, even though it's zero emission. It still is, has some negative connotation. So what we're left with is gas primarily, and solar and wind where it's being developed and plugged into the grid. So the short story is the price of electricity is hand in hand with the price of gas. And for most of PJM, the markets, across the Northeast. And as the heating season approaches, and as other factors prevail upon the gas markets, we saw a run up. We still see the front end of the curve very steep this winter, still above right in the $5, $5.50 range. And but if you look at April and the out months beyond that, we're sub $4. So this is good. I think we're working through, we're unwinding and chewing up some of that expensive front end of the curve. And there will be a little bit of pain in the winter, particularly for the customers who are waiting to see what happens, hoping it comes down. Some say hope is not a strategy, but there are ways to mitigate this. One is take a cap and trans pass through or an energy only product, which we've seen more and more brokers asking for that. Pass through those components at a clearing rate. Don't pay a premium to hedge it. And if they are elevated for a few months, hopefully that works itself out during the wintertime. We've seen other strategies whereby you'll take an all-in fixed, but you go longer because the second and third years out on the curve are certainly less expensive and can mitigate some of the sticker shock of the front end. And you're still protected. And in many cases, such as with SFE, you can work a blend and extend, work an extension, and again, try to ladder those prices down over time. So it's an interesting time over the past 6 months. The volatility is back. We haven't seen gas at these levels in 7 or 8 years. Those of us who have been in the business for, call it 10 years or more, remember the polar vortex, remember the hurricanes that drove pricing up, and the things that happened in 2008 clear on through to 2013. So we've been fortunate for the past 9 years that we've generally been able to give customers a lower price than they had, or at least remain at that level. And so there is some sticker shock for customers that have to shop. Last time they signed a contract was 2 or 3 years ago, and it was a very different landscape. Again, for SFE, we still believe in the all-in fixed. We still believe in going long. An all-in fixed in our world is truly all-inclusive, and is, historically has truly been fixed. That's not to say our contract doesn't have material change or change in law language. That's responsible when you're in the risk business. That's simply a responsible approach. But I think the proof is in the pudding, as they say, and track record and history are better indicators of what you can expect when you put a customer into a contract with our company, or others that you've had positive experience with. We look to drive business. We look to be honest. We look to do the right thing by your customers. I consider you to be my customer, channel partners, agents, salespeople. I mean, you're the ones with the customer relationship. You're the ones that have to stand up in front of that buyer and explain why it's a good idea, why SFE is a good choice, why maybe a price that is much lower than some other supplier is, could be fraught with risk. So we only sell through channels. We don't have a direct sales force. We recognize the relationship and the position that you're in. And I've always had 2 rules for channel sales. Never make the channel look bad to their customer, and always get their money right. And I think those are 2 things that we really strive to do every day. Make sure that we're putting you in the best position, both to close business and to maintain that relationship, and to renew and keep it, keep it stable, keep it reliable. And honesty and partnership are the only ways to really achieve that. Does us no good to bait and switch, or to lowball and then sock you with something down the road. That will only alienate partners, and we'd rather maintain the positive and stand up and own when we do have an error in any way, miss an enrollment date or a start date of some kind, or things happen. We own the mistake. We make it right. We make the customer whole in cases where they've incurred some cost through no fault of their own, or through obvious let's say fault on our end. It's the right thing to do. And we're very fortunate to be the company was founded 15 years ago by 2 gentlemen who come to work every day still, and own the vast majority of the company. And that is to say, we have no debt, we have no private equity, we have no outside influence on how we make our decisions of what's the right way to do business in our estimation. And there's a little bit of Canadian flavor in there. The guys really take a kinder, gentler approach, I think, to the business. And having been at 5 other suppliers over the course of my career, I can tell you, I've seen it done a lot of different ways. This is a bit unique for me. I truly hope that this is my last job, as Jeff Borg, our boss and owner, suggested it could be. So we love it. Eric and I, Eric's down in Houston. He's our ERCOT guru, and covers accounts, of course, all across the industry. Eric and I go back to the early days of the business as co-workers at Strategic Energy. So we're reunited here years later. But capacity markets. I mean, listen, we will see some auctions here in the future. The latest monkey in the wrench has been the FERC ordering a change to the price cap. Used to be that capacity providers could charge up to $1,000 a megawatt when called upon. What we learned in the polar vortex of, I don't know if it was 2013 or 14, was that some of these providers didn't show up. So the response, and not the correct one in my estimation, was to lift the cap and say, well, now there is no cap. Now you can charge whatever you want, but you really, really have to promise that you will show up next time and perform. So I think the FERC has decided that there needs to be a sensible cap. You see what happened in Texas. Their cap was $9,000, and basically they hit that for a week straight back in February. Latest proposals have halved that number down to 4,500 a megawatt. That's ERCOT is not a capacity market; it's an energy only market. So maybe it's not a perfect correlation, but the point being, when you institute caps, you're necessarily going to have some pluses and minuses. But you need the capacity providers to perform in PJM in the heating markets, and so to have a sensible cap that doesn't abuse ratepayers or customers, and also fairly compensates that capacity provider for reserving that capacity to meet demand. I mean, they need to be fairly compensated. So we really should have had another auction by now for the 23-24 capacity year. And that's been put on hold. So we're still in limbo. There's still a whole lot of guesswork being done. It's why you still see diverging strategies from supplier to supplier on how to include capacity costs and still consider it a fixed price without a guarantee of passing through a component that then all of a sudden is no longer fixed. So time will tell. The wheels of the legislators turn slowly. The regulators, I should say, they turn slowly. If you're in Illinois, you likely are aware of the new Illinois energy bill that was passed that contains a raft of provisions for renewables, and the bulk of the cost of these programs will be borne by ratepayers. It's important for you to let your customers know that costs are going up, and not all of it is simply due to the price of gas or the variability of capacity. It's also being driven by the renewable agenda, and there's lots of subsidies to entice large energy users to adopt to stimulate investment in wind and solar, and to taper off the fossil fuels. So with all of that, there are increased costs, and again, not all of those costs can be nailed down 100% and quantified. But a fixed price, if a fixed price is not a fixed price, then we're pulling the rug out from under folks that are counting on us. So that's really our approach. That's our view of where things might go. It's not to say that other suppliers, our competitors, have a wrong view. It's a different approach, and as long as you're transparent with your partners and they know what to expect, then you never leave them standing in front of their customer not knowing how to explain what has transpired, or why their 6-cent rate is now 7.5 cents. So we really strive to avoid that. So Eric, I don't know if you have anything to add, perspective on you lived through that storm in Texas, and winter's fast approaching. It's 70 degrees here in New Jersey today, but the heating season is upon us. The withdrawal season is upon us, and we're entering the winter with storage levels that are not consistent with where we've been in the past. So a real cold winter or outages, things like that can really impact, the cost to serve the customer through that time. Eric?
I could, unfortunately, I've seen a few blurbs here and there about how we could see another event in ERCOT this winter again. Obviously that'll be weather driven, but I don't know that we certainly haven't addressed infrastructure issues in Texas. So, if that happens again, man, I don't know. I would imagine, and you guys are probably, you all know this better than we would, but I would imagine there are probably maybe one or two suppliers left out of what used to be a bunch that are actually allowing index contracts, specifically in ERCOT, going into winter. And it used to be that, you wouldn't want to be on an index rate going into summer unless you knew the fact that over time, index rates outperform fixed rates. Like any of you guys that have ever been to Texas, about Buc-ee's. It's the biggest, most successful convenience store probably that I've ever seen. And he has famously been on index for forever. And the guy just gets it. I know every salesperson, including me, is going after that guy. And he's like, hey, I'm on full index. You can't compete, man. And it's like, okay, thank you. But I hope we don't see that again. Man, it was rough. I know we were sitting here, my wife and daughter were like, Daddy, when's the power coming on? I said, I have no idea. So hopefully we avoid that, but I don't know. It's gonna be interesting to see how ERCOT addresses long-term some of the generation gaps that we currently face. Without a capacity market, we're just not seeing new generation built in ERCOT. And every time we run and hit the cap for any number of intervals in a row, it politically looks horrible. Every newspaper gets a hold of it, and every newscast gets a hold of it and talks about how evil the energy industry is. And so to me, it's sort of a broken system. I would love to see us address it somehow where it doesn't look so just politically horrible for the energy industry. But yeah, that's probably another topic for another day.
Yeah. Is there any legal protection for customers when it comes to forecasting capacity costs beyond published rates?
I can tell you this. Most regulators, and most recently in New York, have ruled that capacity, a fluctuation in the cost of capacity does not constitute change in law. So when a supplier tries to ram through an additional charge under the change in law provision, capacity is not encompassed by change in law. Capacity is a variable component that it's up to the supplier to manage that risk. So if they do, in fact, now if they claim material change, meaning your capacity obligation in any given period has dramatically gone up or down, that's something that you presumably would have known as the facility operator, that you're doing something differently, and you could have communicated that to the supplier. But the cost of capacity is not a change in law. It's a variable component that needs to be controlled or managed, let's say, by the supplier. Yeah,
well, tags are great, but when you talk about capacity, they immediately think about pass through. This is another issue. The cost of the unit of capacity, you need to be able to project. There's an actual market, and if you're offering a product beyond certain terms, some suppliers are not even taking the responsibility regarding that. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, we've got a guy on our team who spent 12 years at another supplier, a large company that he covers pretty much all the regulated states. They had 32 pass-throughs in 1 year of various components in various markets that affected, a mix of their customers, large and small. So, that is not the way to make money as a supplier. That's not how you run a profitable business from our side. is that, hey, let's enforce our contract and collect on this. But to your point, is there a legal protection for a customer who signs a contract that's riddled with, trap doors, and then those trap doors get enforced? I mean, your price is only as good as your contract language, right? And and the faith that folks have in, your execution of your language. So that's why it's so important to read the contract, to read every contract, to know which suppliers take one kind of an approach and which take another. And then it's in practice, right? Are you responsibly hedging as a supplier? Are you, we're always 100% hedged. Our Massachusetts gas book in the winter is probably 125% hedged. We don't, I've worked at other places where we had a risk policy that allowed us to have a certain percentage of our flowing book to be open positions. But, to play that arbitrage can be a recipe for going out of business. Take the position, hope the market drops, buy the energy then and make the difference. And years ago, when we saw a lot more volatility, that was one of the games that was played. But if we've learned anything from some of the big guys going out, the guys down in Florida, we all know about Liberty. It was just announced that the rest of their book that wasn't acquired by NRG will go back to default service. And I think, some of that was based on their approach to the risk and their hedging strategy. So Texas didn't help, but because they did have a significant exposure down there on the index, as Eric mentioned, and states from Texas to New York and everywhere else are passing laws about index and pass-through products and who can be served under them. So it's important to keep up with that stuff. It depends on how a small commercial customer is classified from market to market. In some markets, it's based on peak demand. Some it's based on volume. In New York, it's based on whether you have a demand meter or a non-demand meter. You could be 1 million kilowatt hours, but if you don't have a demand meter, you're still considered small commercial. And as such, the regulatory bodies have specified which products can be sold to that class of customers and which cannot. Those with greater risk, like the index, like the pass-through, more sophisticated, probably, unless they're sold correctly to the buyer, regardless of size, it can come with a lot of kind of unintended consequences. So, the cap and trans pass-through, we do have folks selling that in Illinois, energy only product being sold in Illinois by some of our partners. And, as long as it's sold correctly and fully explained what's included, what is not, it's not a bad way to go, because you're not paying the premium, right? Everybody always wants to pay cost, right? Whatever the transfer cost is with no markup, that's what you would prefer to pay. If you're concerned about volatility in that space, then you might pay a premium to have it hedged if it truly were being hedged and honored at the contracted price.
How do you project capacity cost further than the announced auction results? I mean, most responses are projecting forward from the most recent auction. Some put more weight on the recent auction, and some use, internal market projections. It seems like there's really, no standard here. It seems like some of the suppliers are making decisions of what the future will look like based on what they think is important, and everyone's different. So how to project is entirely different from one supplier to another. So how can we accommodate asking for those capacity costs per kilowatt for the unannounced future periods?
Well, I mean, request it all in fixed and request a cap pass-through, and you can infer the delta between those two offers to be, the capacity cost. I can tell you that our approach, up until the last auction, our approach was to build in a reasonable increase over the last known auction. And the last known auction was 3 years ago. it really kind of hurt our pricing, frankly, because we were using a number and then elevating that by 5% every year. And when the actual auction came through, it was much lower. So, we're trying to be conservative and protect ourselves and our customers. And, with that, when you're buying insurance like that, sometimes you're paying a premium. We've recalibrated, of course, and now have stepped down our baseline by which we, forecast into the future, because we do have a known value from the last auction. And so I think it helps tighten up the spread and give you a more realistic view of what capacity really will cost. What we know is this. We know that there are no new coal plants, nuke plants, or even gas plants getting built in PJM. You can go to PJM's website and you can see the retirements that are planned and how many megawatts are being taken off. And you can see the new projects that are coming on. They're all renewables. They generally don't equal the megawatts being retired, certainly not in the near term. When you shut off a power plant, you flip the switch and it's done tomorrow. And many of the projects slated to backfill that capacity may not be online for years, frankly. So, those capacity providers, they're needed. They're essential. The gas peaker, you can turn it on and turn it off. But, the Yankees, the 600 megawatt plant up in Massachusetts, or, the Filthy Five, which were coal plants that all got taken out of service. They're not coming back. New York, amazingly, refused to renew the permits at Indian Point for both of those reactors, which provide 25% of New York City's power. The demand has not decreased by 25%, so the need is still there. So where will that power come from? And what will be the impact on price? Well, it'll get wheeled down from Canada at huge transmission costs, or it'll come in from the Midwest, where there's a damn good chance that power is being generated in a coal-fired plant in the Midwest. Throw in the line loss associated with shipping power from great distances, and the end result is a higher kilowatt hour price for the ratepayer based on all of those decisions thrown together.
It seems like the auction announcement period is almost half of what it used to be. It used to be announced 4 years in advance, and now it's hardly even 2 years. Is that just because of uncertainty in the marketplace?
What they're trying to do is catch up for those years that we did not have any auctions. So they had scheduled them for 6-month intervals that they would conduct these auctions, and the RPM model was basically you're procuring 3 years out, right? But they've tightened it up a little bit because there's so much unknown that they've got to run these auctions to get caught up to where we know capacity out to I want to say 24, 25. We're currently in capacity year 21, 22. So they still want to take it out 3 years. They're just going to have to accelerate the frequency of the auctions in order to deliver that stability and that degree of certainty, if you want to call it that, about capacity costs within PJM. New York is different. New York, there's a dynamic capacity market. They auction twice a month. It used to just be New York City and rest of state. They a couple years ago, they created what they call Lower Hudson Valley Capacity Zone, which is just north of the city. Still increased demand relative to zones A through G, let's say. But there's more. It's a more liquid market, let's say, and we're not waiting around for auctions. You can buy and sell capacity on a more frequent basis throughout New York ISO, which I think is the best model personally. Where you have Texas at one end of the spectrum, that not only is it's not a capacity market really because they have no interconnection to other ISOs. ERCOT's an island, doesn't have the transmission. Even if capacity providers were willing to commit that they would perform when needed, there's just not the infrastructure to get the power into ERCOT. New York ISO is a self-contained RTO or regional transmission organization. So they've got the transmission stretching into PJM, stretching into Canada and into NEPOOL. And so there are a lot of ways to get the power when you need it. It's just you're going to pay for it. So where Eric referenced the guy that loves to be on the index and has probably averaged 4-cent power or cheaper over the past 10 or 15 years, you know, a move to a capacity market doubles everybody's kilowatt hour price. And I think that in Texas, it'll be a while before folks are convinced that going from 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt to 8 or 9 cents is a good thing for them. But you know, you make your bed and you lie in it. So you know, PJM's trying to kind of split the middle, and there's a lot at stake. 13 states now tied into PJM, and ultimately the ratepayer is at the short end of that stick when it comes to writing the check and absorbing the increases. So I look forward to the day when these capacity auctions are completed and there's some greater degree of certainty, which I would expect the industry to be able to then focus and tighten up, and we would not see such a disparity from one supplier to the next on pricing and capacity as a component of overall pricing, and then you know, the actions that happen along those lines of a pass-through. I'd like to see some of that go away. If you recall, a couple of years ago, Direct Energy really tried to nudge the whole industry towards an energy-only concept.
Yeah.
And it was soundly rejected, but in premise, they were on the right track. Basically, they got tired of saying they were hedging components that they knew they really couldn't hedge. And, you know, their view was you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Because you'll always get blamed if you try to recoup your costs, but you'll hurt your business if you try to price it all in with a little fluff to protect all your customers. So it comes down to, you know, execution, track record, and what is a broker comfortable selling, and what are you comfortable explaining to your customer about, you know, if that should come to pass. There's a legitimate explanation for pass-throughs. It's not always popular. People don't always want to hear it, but there are often, you know, explanations that do make sense based on a supplier's approach to costing that piece of it. But it's not an answer that most folks want to hear when they've been sold a, you know, all in fixed. So
I get it. And I understand the nature of business, customer type, risk, and, you know, involved, the patterns of consumption. There seems to be no relevance.
and a supplier who is, you know, who's a good partner will listen to the broker, the consultant, who says, listen, they're making some changes at this facility. They are adding a production line, and we can plan for that and say, oh, okay, then the third year of this contract, you know, we'll have to procure X amount more energy or capacity, but you can work together to profile that stuff. And the same is true of solar or other, you know, net metered type of customers who may be curtailing or using their own energy when they can. And does it impact your, you know, the total kWh that was hedged for you, Mr. Customer? Well, it does. But if a supplier that's really concerned about that will have bandwidth or swing provisions, you know, and that's true on the gas side as well. Again, we're, you know, fully fixed, full requirements, as they call it. So there is no penalty for deviation. However, you know, in the case of again, I go back to the invoking the material change. If you know you're going to do something dramatically different, up or down, it's best to just communicate that so we can work together, you know, to make sure all the bases are covered.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Bill and Eric. Great conversation, lots of industry inside knowledge. Bill, do you have any closing thoughts?
This energy bill that was passed it's worth reading because it's going to impact all of your customers, and you can really see where the costs are buried and over what period of time they'll be phased in. And those costs do grow over time. and it doesn't seem there's any getting around it. So you may as well prepare your customers for, these things have been voted on, and it's not up to me as a supplier or you as a consultant that, to pass or reject these things. It's help our customers, manage their expectations, manage their energy budget and their energy spend, and be prepared for what's coming next. So, and it's always something. There's always something coming next.
Again, thank you guys for being on the call today, and want to thank everybody for taking time out of their weekend to be here today. It's greatly appreciated. We are just 40 minutes past the hour, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for today. I want to thank everyone for being on the call. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So have a great weekend, and we'll see you all next week. Bye now.